Who are we? Why are we here? How do we, relate to the world around us? These aren't just abstract thoughts, are they? Really universal questions getting right to the heart of identity. And today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. How to maintain a Muslim identity, particularly when you're living in places where Islam isn't the majority faith.
That's right. And our mission here is to, unpack quite a few sources we've gathered. We've got scholarly articles, some really thoughtful reflections, different analyses, all looking at this complex challenge from slightly different angles. We're aiming to pull out the key insights, show you the different perspectives, and hopefully give you a clearer, more actionable understanding.
And that distillation, that's really what people are looking for, isn't it? Especially there's so many viewpoints out there. We've looked at sources like Utruj, an article on preserving Islamic identity in the West, another from About Islam on protecting it. They all bring something unique. So yeah, let's get into it. Maybe we should start at the beginning. Like, what is the core Muslim identity according to these sources? They seem to say that Islam, right from the start, gave people a pretty clear identity, a purpose, and a path. At its heart, it's about peaceful submission to God.
Exactly. And what's compelling is how this frames Muslims as moral agents here on earth, created specifically to worship Allah, God alone, and the Prophet Muhammad's example, his sunnah, that guides how Allah wants that worship to happen. The name itself, Islam, means peaceful submission, and a Muslim is someone who commits to that, this clarity. It's described as a huge mercy, avoiding that feeling of being lost or confused about purpose.
But it's not the only identity someone has, right? That's a really interesting point the sources make. You can be Muslim and American, or an artist, a scientist. I think one source even mentioned a rare stamp collector.
Right. And the Quran itself, in Surah Al-Hujurat 49.13, points to this. It says, "We were made into nations and tribes so we could get to know each other. The most honored," it says, "are the most righteous." So that diversity is actually highlighted.
Which suggests that diversity benefits the community, doesn't it?
Right.
It's not about wiping away other parts of yourself. It's more about integrating them within that Islamic framework, making the whole richer.
That's a really crucial distinction. And it leads us right into one of the core challenges discussed, this whole issue of imitation versus distinguishing your identity.
Ah, yes, the hadith.
Yeah.
The saying of the Prophet Muhammad, "He who imitates any people is considered to be one of them." It's often quoted just like that, as one line. It's authentic, apparently, but it's part of a longer narration.
Yes, found in Musnad Imam Ahmed, and this is critical context. Every hadith has one. The Prophet chose his words for specific situations. Taking a saying out of context, it can really cloud the meaning. Our sources strongly emphasize that the prohibition here in this hadith is primarily about imitating the aqdah, the core beliefs, the doctrines of non-Muslims.
Okay, so the core beliefs. But how does that play out in everyday life? Because interpretations seem to differ quite a bit. We've got what's described as a stricter view first.
Yes, some use this hadith to prohibit basically any practice that isn't explicitly Islamic, but common in the wider society. Things like birthday parties, New Year's, even giving gifts at Christmas if you're just being neighborly. Their logic is, these are things non-Muslims do, so if you participate, you're imitating them, and that potentially makes you one of them.
And that sounds quite far-reaching.
It can be. And they often reference classical scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah, who wrote about not imitating non-Muslims in their religious affairs. The intention, the sources note, is good, wanting to keep the religion pure. But a major concern raised by others is that this view can sometimes link almost everything back to aqidah, even very normal cultural things. And that, as one source put it, can become terrifying territory. It implies everyday actions might jeopardize your core faith.
That does sound quite heavy. So what's the alternative view, the more balanced one?
Well, the counter argument is basically that applying this hadith to things that aren't about core beliefs or worship is misinterpreting its scope. They bring up examples like wearing trousers. Initially, some scholars did see it as imitation, but later the conclusion was, no, it's just clothing. It's not inherently tied to another faith's worship or beliefs. It became normal, widely accepted. One scholar apparently wrote 200 pages on it. Just shows the depth of these discussions.
200 pages on trousers. Okay.
Okay.
So applying that to birthdays, for example.
Exactly. The argument is it's not an aqidah issue. It's marking a year of life. It's not intrinsically a pagan ritual, despite some claims about origins. So parents forbidding it, while maybe well-intentioned, could be based on a misunderstanding, provided there's nothing else forbidden involved, like extravagance or un-Islamic activities.
Right. This seems to point towards a certain flexibility within Islam itself.
It does. The sources explain that Islam was revealed for all times and places, and out of mercy, Allah left some matters deliberately undefined the mascot anhu, things God was silent on. This silence allows room, flexibility for social practices that don't actually violate core Islamic principles. The Prophet, peace be upon him, generally sought ease for people, not complication, as long as fundamentals weren't compromised.
And this idea of having a distinct identity, but also adapting, seems rooted in early Islamic history, too.
Absolutely. Islam emerged in a society with many pre-Islamic customs. The Prophet clarified justice, reformed harmful practices, but didn't necessarily overturn everything. He established a distinct Muslim identity where it mattered most in belief and core practices.
Like the adhan, the call to prayer. That was chosen specifically to be different, wasn't it?
Precisely. Instead of using a horn or a Christian-style bell or lighting a fire like Zoroastrians, it was intentionally unique.
And the Qibla change. The direction of prayer shifting from Jerusalem to the Kaaba in Mecca.
Yes, the Quran mentions the Prophet's longing for that independent direction, Quran 2.144. It was about establishing that unique focal point for the community, a symbol of their distinct path.
Even things like appearance. The guidance on trimming the mustache and letting the beard grow, that was initially to differ from the Zoroastrians.
That's the context given. And interestingly, some scholars noted that when that distinction in appearance, like white hair, was no longer exclusive to them, the emphasis shifted. It shows adaptability based on the underlying reason, distinctiveness, rather than rigid adherence to the form itself when the context changes.
So in Medina, with a large Jewish community, the Prophet was careful about Muslims not adopting practices that went against Islamic law, the Sharia.
Very keen, yes. Ensuring their identity and message remain clear without becoming overly rigid about things that were permissible.
Which brings us to that very vivid warning, the lizard hole one.
Ah, yes. The hadith narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. The Prophet warned that Muslims might follow the ways of those before them so closely, inch by inch, cubit by cubit, that even if they went down a lizard's hole, Muslims would follow.
It's such a strong image.
It really is. It highlights the danger of losing your dignity, your identity, by just blindly following trends, even if they seem utterly pointless or even degrading. It's a call to be conscious, to be principled, to make sure our choices reflect our values, not just mimicry. It really makes you think about adopting trends without asking why, doesn't it?
Definitely. Okay, so with that historical context and the principles laid out, let's look at the specific pressures people face today, especially in non-Muslim environments. Some sources paint a pretty stark picture, suggesting Islamic identity is rapidly dissolving in the melting pot of Western societies.
Yes, there's a strong view presented that Islamic beliefs, values, manners are giving way to non-Muslim ones. And this challenge feels unique, they argue, because there isn't that traditional Islamic leadership structure, like a caliphate, to offer guidance or protection.
So where do these pressures come from? The sources seem to pinpoint the education system quite heavily.
They do. It's often described as a place where an indoctrination process can begin, according to these particular sources. Children are in environments where things like gender mixing are normal, even encouraged in activities. The argument is this can lead to accepting dating culture, boyfriends, girlfriends, and seeing traditional Islamic separation as, old-fashioned.
And it goes beyond social norms, too. There's concern about the idea of becoming good citizens.
Yeah. Yes, the worry expressed in some sources is that becoming a good Australian or good American might mean prioritizing national laws or customs over Allah's commands. Things like flag ceremonies, national anthems, participating in democratic systems which some sources describe as shirk-based because laws aren't solely derived from divine revelation. The concern is a potential shift in loyalty.
Okay. And what about the curriculum itself?
Well, subjects dealing with relationships and health are sometimes seen, again, by these sources, as promoting promiscuity or normalizing things contrary to Islamic teaching, like homosexuality. History teaching is often flagged as Eurocentric, barely mentioning Muslim contributions, which they fear can lead to children feeling ashamed, maybe anglicizing names like Muhammad to Mike.
Even in secular schools, things like Christmas activities can create pressure.
Yeah, nativity plays, Christmas cards. It can make Muslim children feel pressured to participate in practices linked to another faith.
And the sources seem quite critical of parents in this context, too.
There's definitely concern voiced about parents perhaps prioritizing work or material progress over providing deep Islamic grounding at home. Using childcare extensively, mothers working instead of focusing on Islamic education, fathers focused on finances. It's framed as potentially neglecting core duties. And this, they argue, can leave children more vulnerable to outside influences, described quite strongly as wolves of disbelief.
So the proposed solution there is really strong home-based Islamic education.
Absolutely. To counter what they see as falsehoods taught elsewhere, instill pride, and equip children with solid Aqidah and Islamic knowledge.
Right, moving from education, the media gets a lot of attention too.
A huge amount. The perspective in these sources is that media, especially TV, generally presents a worldview through the eyes of a non-believer. News reporting might use labels like terrorist for mujahideen or Islamic fundamentalism for the straight path. This, they argue, can foster negative self-perception if being Muslim is constantly linked to negative press.
And beyond the news, what about entertainment?
Here, the critique is often about morality. Sources argue that behavior they consider filthy, evil, and un-Islamic, like depicting zina, unlawful intimacy as love is presented as normal, even desirable. It sort of cloaks it in respectability, making it seem like the social standard.
Even for children?
Yes, concerns are raised about cartoons featuring elements seen as idol worship, or focusing on false gods like characters calling on Superman for help instead of Allah. This is viewed as potentially laying groundwork for shirk, associating partners with God. Shows for young people are also critiqued for sometimes portraying parent-child conflicts in ways that don't align with Islamic respect for parents.
So the media isn't just reflecting reality, it's actively shaping values.
That's the argument. Defining success, big houses, expensive cars, defining beauty standards, dictating what's normal. It shifts the focus, they say, from striving for paradise in the next life to trying to create a sort of paradise in this world, the dunya.
And the proposed solution for media influence.
Active censorship within the home, basically. Critically evaluating everything watched or read against Islamic teachings, and actively countering un-Islamic messages with reminders from the Quran and Hadith.
Okay, education, media, and the third big area flagged is simply mixing with non-Muslims.
Yes, and this is often described as perhaps the most significant threat because it's subtle. A kind of slow, almost unnoticed erosion of identity. They cite a saying attributed to the Prophet suggesting that being with a people for 40 days or more can lead you to start adopting their characteristics.
Right, and this touches on friendships too.
It does. Some sources point to verses like in Surah Al-Mumtahina 60.2, warning against taking non-Muslims as intimate allies or very close friends, awliya. The verse states, their desire is often for Muslims to disbelieve. The concern is that closeness might lead Muslims to compromise their beliefs or practices to please friends or just to fit in.
Fitting in. That can lead to what they call an apologetic mindset.
Exactly, where you might start adjusting how you practice or express your Islam to make it seem less different, more acceptable to the mainstream.
And this can start small, but lead to bigger compromises.
That's the fear. Seemingly minor things changing dress style, a man shaving his beard, a woman removing her hijab might be the first step. Then maybe becoming less strict about halal food, maybe eventually even social drinking. The end result, these sources argue, is a kind of watered-down, kafir-friendly Islam.
So for this particular threat, the proposed solution is quite direct.
Yes, limiting contact with non-Muslims primarily to necessities, work, school, essential interactions, and consciously offsetting that by spending more time with practicing Muslims, strengthening those bonds.
Okay, so given all these challenges, education, media, social mixing, how do the sources suggest people actively protect their identity? What are the strategies?
Well, the number one defense, echoed across the board, is knowledge. Arming yourself with correct Aqidah, understanding your own faith deeply, and also, crucially, being aware of how society might subtly try to mislead or influence you. That awareness is seen as key.
And strengthening the family unit comes up again.
Absolutely central. The father is often described using the shepherd analogy, responsible for protecting his flock. Parents have a duty, according to these sources, to provide that solid Islamic education outside of the school system, teaching children that the Quran and Sunnah are the ultimate criteria for judging everything else. This might mean dedicated family time for study, discussion, and really living the example.
Right. Now, there's a really interesting point about not just defending identity internally, but how you project it outwards. Being a role model, engaging in dawah.
Yes, this shifts the focus, doesn't it? In a minority context, being a positive role model is vital. It's not just about, say, a woman wearing hijab, but about embodying Islamic values. Goodness, wisdom, kindness, honesty, and not being embarrassed if your good actions clearly stem from your faith. Being open about it.
And showing those concurrent identities we talked about earlier, like being Muslim and a nerd or an artist.
Exactly. Making dawah, partly by just being visibly Muslim and a normal, multifaceted person, helps break down stereotypes. It shows people Islam doesn't demand conformity into one single mold, or robots, as one source put it. It shows the human richness within the faith.
That connects to addressing that potential identity crisis linked to colonialism too, doesn't it?
It does. Some sources discuss this idea that colonialism left behind a sense of inferiority, where success meant imitating the colonizer, leading to shame in one's own heritage. They contrast this with the Prophet's example, like using high-quality Indian swords, but then learning how to make them locally. It shows it's good to acquire useful knowledge and skills from others, taking the good, leaving the bad for the benefit of your own community. It's conscious selection, not blind imitation.
Which loops back perfectly to avoiding those blind trends, the lizard hole idea. Don't just follow, think, especially if the trend involves something Islamically questionable.
Precisely. Maintain that conscious, principled approach.
Okay, so knowledge, family, role modeling, conscious adaptation. Is there a final, perhaps more extreme solution mentioned?
Yes, some sources do conclude that the ultimate solution, the one they argue guarantees protection, is physical separation. Removing oneself from non-Muslim environments and moving to a Muslim-majority land. They use a powerful analogy. Mixing pure spring water with even a drop of dirty sewer water contaminates it. The implication is that living among disbelief inevitably compromises faith. It's presented as the surest way, though obviously a huge step with many implications.
Wow. Okay, that really covers a huge amount of ground. What a deep dive that was. We've explored this really complex challenge of holding on to Muslim identity, especially in the West. That constant tension between, fitting in and staying true, adapting versus preserving core beliefs.
It really is a delicate balance, isn't it? And it requires continuous, conscious effort. No easy answers.
Definitely not. So perhaps we can leave you, our listeners, with a final thought to mull over. How do we best balance the beauty of our diverse concurrent identities with the strength and integrity of our core Muslim identity? How do we ensure our dignity and our purpose remain intact in a world that's constantly, relentlessly influencing us?